Hello everyone, my name is Maria. I'm a first year architecture student at Virginia Tech, and today I'm going to talk about my research report. My research report is about the relationship between Antoní Gaudi and first year architecture students. Antoní Gaudi is a famous Spanish architect, and I chose this topic because I've been able to witness some of his works when I went to Barcelona, Spain. And it was so interesting and impressive that I was curious to know if first year architecture students were aware of him and of his work. I started with my research question, which was: is the architect Antoní Gaudi and his work, mainly La Sagrada Familia, known by the rising generation of architecture students? I chose to focus more on La Sagrada Familia because it is his most famous work, and I thought if students knew any of his work, it would be La Sagrada Familia. So that's why I chose it. After that, I conducted a survey, and I'm gonna share some of my survey results. For my first question, I asked, do you know who Antoní Gaudi is? And only 50% said yes, which was kind of surprising because I thought that I was expecting most of them to say that they knew who he was, but only half did. For my next question, I asked, on a scale from 1 to 5, how familiar are you with the church, La Sagrada Familia? Meaning if they knew what it is and what it looks like. Most of them selected 1 and 4. 4 meaning that they're very familiar with it, just not 100%, and 1 meaning that they're not familiar with it at all. Moving on, my next question was, on a scale from 1 to 5, how much do you know about the history behind La Sagrada Familia? This question is a little bit different because it requires a greater knowledge of the church. For example, that it is based on nature, that Gaudi used organic forms when building it. And for that question, the answers were kind of what I was expecting, because I wasn't expecting most of them to know a lot about the history behind the church, and that's what happened because most of the students selected 1 and 2. 1 meaning that they did not know at all about the history behind it, and 2 meaning that they did, but just a little bit. For my next question, I asked, are you familiar with what inspired Gaudi as an architect? Most of the students said no, and only a small portion said yes. From that question, what I meant was if they knew his background, his childhood, what inspired him, and everything. So they also had to have a greater knowledge of the architect itself. My last question was, has Gaudi's work inspired your journey as an architecture student somehow? Most of them said no, which was kind of what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that much to say yes, which was a good percentage of the students. So from my survey, I concluded that the majority said yes to my research question, meaning that they knew who Gaudi was and what La Sagrada Familia is. However, they're not very familiar with the history behind the church, with Gaudi's background, what inspired him. And regarding Gaudi's influence on their journey, it was kind of split half and half. So from that, I could say that Gaudi is known by most of first-year architecture students indeed. However, most of the students are not aware of his background, the history behind his work, mainly the church. They do not have a deeper knowledge of him and his work. The ones who do have greater knowledge of him, it is very likely to have been influenced by him. However, the ones who have lesser knowledge of him, it is likely to not have been influenced by him. So that was my research. I think it was pretty successful, even though some of my conclusions were different than what I was expecting, but I think it was a very successful research, and thank you for listening.